2021 is going to be a crazy year. Hopefully not as crazy as 2020 in a lot of ways. In this video, I want to try to focus on new servants, on SSRs mainly. So if I gloss over some 4 stars or gloss over some old servants, please excuse me. The one overarching theme with this video though is that I strongly recommend you guys stock up on your art servants. Start looking at all these art servants throughout the year, because when 2022 hits, when 5th anniversary hits 2 years from now, you guys will not only thank me, you guys will thank yourselves for thinking ahead. But regardless, do let me know who's the top 5 servants you hope to get next year for 2021. So of course, January starts off with our New Year's servant, Benny Anma, 5-star Saber, Art Saber in fact. Her Noble Phantasm hits pretty hard depending on the alignment of the enemy, if they're chaotic and or evil, so the two could stack. She has some utility as well. Her 3rd skill is actually pretty good. At level 10, it could grant 20% NP battery to the entire team, as well as a buff removal resistance. She also has a passive skill that's pretty unique to her actually. She has a skill seal debuff immunity. So if you need a hard-hitting Saber with a lot of utility, then Benny Anma is just a servant for you. Speaking of single target art servants, Li Shuan Assassin just got a buff actually recently in JP. He was already a hard-hitting assassin, don't get me wrong, but now he's even a harder-hitting assassin with a chance of instant kill with his Noble Phantasm. His skills are pretty basic, nothing too insane, nothing too crazy. He's obviously crit-oriented, he has a bit of survivability, he's an art servant, so he's gonna work well with Caster Arturia. And then we're wrapping up January with the Prisma Ilia rerun event, but the banner will also feature a new 4-star caster, Miyu. Just like Fujino for the Kara no Kyokai rerun event, Miyu is a limited 4-star servant, so if you want to go for her for collection purposes, go ahead and go for her. But I'm going to be blunt for a second right here. I'm going to be very blunt. She's actually a pretty mediocre caster, if I'm going to be honest. The only other good thing besides maybe her Noble Phantasm is her 3rd skill, which does grant an ally 30% NP battery as well as buff success rate, which is pretty good because not too many servants give buff success rate buffs. And keep in mind, again, just like Fujino, at the time of recording this video, she has not gotten another 8 up. For collection purposes, yeah, go for Miyu, 100%, go for her. And then we move on to February, and the new Valentine servant for 2021 is gonna be Murasaki Shikibu. He's a 5-star caster that's kind of similar to Benny Anma in the sense that they both have damaging Noble Phantasms, but their skills offer a lot of utility. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, Murasaki Shikibu's Noble Phantasm actually puts buff block on all the enemies, so like that's actually a pretty good piece of utility right there. But just like Benny Anma, her 3rd skill does offer team-wide buff removal resistance. But along with that, in the same skill, she also offers party debuff immunity, which is just amazing. In terms of damage, she is kind of niche because she focuses on doing extra damage against demonic enemies. Murasaki also has an NP battery, so she's actually pretty good when it comes to clearing enemies, when it comes to farming. I would mainly go for her just for the 3rd skill alone. At the end of the month, we actually do get another rerun event with the Fate Extra CCC rerun event. Of course, this means we get Melt Lilith and Passion Lip as our banner servants. In addition to them, we actually get a new 5-star alter ego, King Protea. Her skill set is unique, but keep in mind that the 2nd skill relies on the fact that the 1st skill stacks its own buffs. So if an enemy removes King Protea's buffs, then she's kind of screwed. Usually people just like to bring King Protea and maybe like double Merlin or something just to max out her damage. After that, we move on to March. At the beginning, it's kind of dead. I mean, we do get the White Day event with Moriarty. That's kind of it. But it's when we get to the latter half of March, that's when things get really interesting. During the Oku event, we are introduced to the 5-star assassin Kama, another Sakura face actually, so all you Sakura face lovers, February and March is going to be very hard for you guys. Kama is the complete package. She has some survivability with heal and guts, as well as a 3-turn attack up and a crit up, not to even mention a 50% NP battery at level 10 with her 3rd skill. Her Noble Phantasm is a single target NP, so don't expect to bring her when it comes to farming, but when it comes to challenges, when it comes to enemies with breaks, her Noble Phantasm is absolutely busted. Her Noble Phantasm has an 80% chance of charming the enemy. And if you use her 3rd skill beforehand, she's pretty much guaranteed to get a charm off. So with double Scotty, you could spam out her Noble Phantasm maybe 3 to 4 times, depending, and pretty much guarantee the enemy is not going to have a turn because they're going to be charm locked. With each Noble Phantasm she uses, she grants herself quick performance up for 3 turns. So each consecutive turn you use her Noble Phantasm, she's going to hit harder and harder. You're talking about consistent damage. You're talking about charm locking the enemy. I guess another thing to take note of that's pretty unique to Kama is that along with her 50% NP battery with her 3rd skill, she also grants herself a buff that grants her both attack and defense advantage against alter egos. She's gonna do 2 times extra damage against alter ego, and she's gonna take half damage from them. So they're gonna lose their alter ego affinity against Kama. The full package servant right here. If you're not going for Kama and you don't have a good assassin, bruh, Carrying over to April, we do get a part 2 banner for the Oku event featuring Kiara. She is already a good NP spammer as it is, but when Cast Arturia gets introduced a year later, she becomes an even better NP spammer. The previous year's Guda Guda event also gets a rerun, which means the return of Oki to Altar, but she's also accompanied by Hijikata. We do get a pre-campaign for the Case Files event featuring Waver, so if you don't have Waver at this point, maybe try to pick him up. And then at the end of the month, we should be getting our Case Files event itself, which will give us 4-star Assassin Gray as our free servant, 4-star Ruler Estrella as our 4-star Gacha servant, and 5-star Rider Reigns as our 5-star Gacha servant. And she's pretty interesting because upon release, she's actually not the greatest. In terms of support, she does offer some NP battery, not as much as Waver upon release, and she does offer some defense up as well as a targetable invincibility to the party, so I guess that's pretty good. What definitely makes her unique though is definitely her Noble Phantasm. Not only does it inflict a defense down as well as removing her own debuffs, it also grants the party a buff that allows them to ignore their defense weaknesses against the class that would usually be strong against them. In other words, for example, if you bring her with a bunch of berserkers, with Reigns' Noble Phantasm, she makes it so they're still strong against everything, they still keep their offensive advantage, but their defensive disadvantage is gone, so that means berserkers will take neutral damage from enemies now, no longer extra damage. But again, she's nothing too crazy, she's nothing too amazing until a year later. She gets a buff a year later that gives her third skill a 20% targetable NP battery, which just like Waver, now she has a maximum of 50% potential Noble Phantasm gauge to a single ally. Definitely not a bad idea to go for her now, just because her Noble Phantasm could come in handy with protecting certain berserkers, especially certain berserkers that come out later this year as well. Moving on to May, there's really nothing to talk about with May. Nothing really new happens in May, to be quite honest. Use May as a time to rack up on your quartz, save up some money, save up some tickets, and just chill. Moving on to June, this is when we finally get Lostbelt 4, which part 1 banner is actually pretty underwhelming. Now, I don't want to discredit Ganesha or Lakshmi Bai for that matter, but the part 1 banner, I would skip it just because the part 2 banner is just so much better. Do keep in mind though that a year later in 2022, we do get our very first SSR ticket, non-limited of course, non-limited servants only, and you could pick Ganesha as your free 5-star. I would wait a year. I know that's a long time, but it's gonna go by pretty quick. But the reason I strongly recommend you guys to wait is because for the part 2 banner of Lostbelt 4, we are introduced to a limited 5-star berserker that is arguably the strongest AoE buster servant in the game, the infamous Arjuna Altar. He's also accompanied by Ashwatthama, but truth be told, Ashwatthama is kind of whatever. He's not the best, is certainly not broken. Same thing with Lakshmi Bai. I'm sorry I glossed over her, but if we're going to be talking about the both of them, if you already have good archers, if you already good sabers for that matter, going for either of them is not that, you know, priority, I guess. A free 4-star ticket comes around the corner, so if you really want either of the two, you know, free 4-star ticket. Going back to Arjuna Altar. Arjuna Altar is basically Gilgamesh, if Gilgamesh was a berserker with survivability. So looking at his AoE Buster Noble Phantasm, I mean, it inflicts Buster resistance down before damage, which already guarantees, unless the enemy has some kind of debuff immunity or something along those lines, Arjuna Altar is going to do insane damage right off the bat. But what allows him to do insane damage to absolutely broken ass damage is his first skill. His first skill gives him an attack up for 3 turns, 30%. What makes his first skill insanely busted is the fact that it grants him a maximum of 50% extra damage at level 10 if the enemy has a debuff. So what you do is you use his first skill, then use his Noble Phantasm. Again, his Noble Phantasm inflicts Buster resistance down before damage. Therefore, his first skill's second effect will proc, where he will get an additional amount of damage if the enemy has a debuff, which will be that Buster resistance down. And then you team him up with like double Merlin or something, you're gonna be seeing crazy numbers. And if you have crit stars, even better, because he has star absorption for buster cards. Again, he's triple buster for 3 turns via his second skill, as well as a 30% NP battery. So again, Gilgamesh, if Gilgamesh was a berserker, with some survivability, and that some survivability comes from his third skill, because his third skill gives him guts for 3 turns, 1 time of course, and some heal as well. So I recommend going for Arjuna Altar just because he looks good, his Noble Phantasm hits hard, he has pretty good skills, he has his own NP battery, he synergizes well with the buster meta. I mean, one of the full package servants along with Kama this year for sure. To wrap up June, we might get a Narrow Bride raid up for the download campaign. Her first skill does get a buff that gives her a targetable NP battery, so now she's even better when it comes to support and utilities. So if you want to go for her, go right ahead. When July rolls over and we get the new Guda Guda event, Nobunaga, Demon King Avenger 5-star Nobunaga. Look at this woman. She's an absolute beauty. Everything about her is damn near perfect from a design standpoint. Unfortunately, that's where kind of the good things end, because in terms of gameplay, Nobu is actually not that great. She's kind of niche. She doesn't hit that hard despite being a buster. I guess you could make her hit hard with Merlin and whatnot. You also get a free 4-star Arts Lancer for the Guda Guda event, Nagao Kagetora. Otherwise, July is kind of wrapped up with the summer rerun events. And then we move on to August, aka anniversary month. And this year's anniversary 5-star servant will be 5-star Rider Da Vinci Lily. And while she's not as broken as Scotty, and definitely not as broken as her successor Caster Arturia the following year, Rider Da Vinci is still a pretty solid arts servant. Looking at her skills and her Noble Phantasm, she's pretty much made for NP spamming. At level 10, her first skill makes it so she gets 20% NP every turn for 3 turns. Her AoE Arts Noble Phantasm also charges the party, not just herself, by 20%. So she's guaranteed to at least have 40% NP by the next turn. And this is not even counting the amount of NP she gets by hitting the enemies. This doesn't count the amount of NP she could get from other servant skills and whatnot. So if you buff up her NP gain or her arts performance, which she also increases with her Noble Phantasm, by the way, then she's guaranteed to have her Noble Phantasm by the next turn. Assuming you already use her Noble Phantasm at least twice, that's already 40% Noble Phantasm to your 2 other allies, plus an additional 10% from her 3rd skill. So that's 50% to the entire party. So, like, yeah, she's that good. And if you're going to be using Da Vinci Lily, you're most likely going to be going up against casters, most likely going up against the doors for QP, and they're going to give you enough NP back to spam anyway. You don't need that much buffs, you don't need that much team setup to be able to NP spam with Da Vinci Lily. Granted, her damage isn't the highest, especially pre-Caster Arturia, but it's enough to farm most daily quests. And it only gets even more broken for Arts Servants from here on out, because we are introduced to a new summer event, which of course will give us 4-star Saber Hokusai, who is a solid Saber if you need a single target Arch Saber. But really, we're going to be paying more attention to the gacha. Call me biased, call me whatever you want, but in my opinion, Summer Musashi, Berserker Musashi, is one of the best servants to go for 2021. She's sort of similar to Reigns in the sense that upon release, she's not the best servant to go for. On paper, you might look at her like, she seems okay, but definitely not worth going for at this moment. When Caster Arturia comes out, Musashi Berserker becomes one of the best NP spammers. You're talking about an AoE Arts Berserker that could spam out her Noble Phantasm with double Caster Arturia using a Black Grail. That's right, not using Kaleidoscope, straight up the Black Grail, 80% NP damage up on a Berserker that could spam out her NP 3 times? Potentially 4 times, depending? Like, bruh. She is that good. She's one of the few servants that's actually able to do that with double Caster Arturia. A lot of people like to crap on her when she was released because her 3rd skill has this 5k HP demerit. If the enemy is dead, who cares about HP demerit? I just want to point out that she has Ignores Invincibility, which also pierces through Evade as well. It pierces both Invulnerability and Evade. I don't know if people even realize that. So you're talking about an NP spammer that could pierce both Evade and Invincibility. Very busted NP spammer in my opinion. Of course, Summer Musashi is also accompanied by Summer Osakabe and Summer Carmilla. A week later, we should be getting a part 2 banner featuring Ruler Arturia, along with Summer Melt and Summer Okita, which is a pretty stacked banner. I mean, just 3 fan favorites right off the bat. Funny enough, this banner is kind of a reverse of the part 1 banner in the sense that in terms of gameplay, you're probably going to be looking more at the 4 stars, specifically Summer Melt. I mean, design wise, look at her. She wears a penguin outfit. I mean, that alone should get you to want to roll for her. Summer Melt becomes extremely broken when Caster Arturia comes out. She becomes one of the best NP spammers in the game, actually. And as a 4-star, that's really good, because you're most likely going to get multiple copies of her unless somehow your luck gets reversed and you get multiple copies of Ruler Arturia like my brother before you NP5 Summer Melt. And I guess the cherry on top for August is that Merlin does come back as well for the summer event. You get the costume. So if you need Merlin for your Buster memes, then you know, he's there for you. September is actually a pretty dead month, besides the fact that we do get Battle New York Part 2, which will feature Gilgamesh coming back, and of course a new lineup of Kratuses with him. Do keep in mind though that Gilgamesh does get his animation update for this Battle in New York event, and he looks absolutely stunning. Otherwise, I'd strongly recommend you guys to wait till October. For October, we do get the Halloween rerun of the previous year, featuring of course Sitanai. We also get Shuten in the banner and Summer Ibaraki in the banner. Unfortunately though, speaking of Halloween, This will be pretty much our last Halloween event. After this Halloween event, they kind of stopped. DW kind of stopped doing Halloween-oriented events. I don't know why. In place of a new Halloween event, we do get Saber Wars 2, which has a pre-campaign featuring MHX. And then Saber Wars 2, the actual event, comes out a week after the pre-campaign. If we're talking about NP spamming, if we're going to be talking about art servants that are absolutely broken, in addition to Musashi Berserker, we have to talk about Space's Char. I mean, her skills are absolutely stacked. Look at her skills and tell me they're not busted. So attack up to herself for 3 turns, only 20%, whatever. But it also gives 30% attack up at level 10 to the entire team besides herself. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's probably the highest charisma. Her second skill is where things get really interesting, and she's one of the few servants who's able to do this kind of shenanigans. So NP damage up for one-time use, 3 turns. Not bad, of course. Invincibility, kind of to be expected. After all, original Ishtar did the same thing. But with the same skill, you're able to select if you want her Noble Phantasm to be quick, arts, or buster. By default, it's always arts. But with this skill, for 3 turns, you could change it to quick if you want it to be quick for 3 turns. You could change it to buster if you want it to be buster for 3 turns. This gives her crazy synergy with any support caster you want. And that was just her second skill. Her third skill gives herself a 50% NP battery, just like her original self. Granted, there's some RNG with her third skill. It does have an 80% chance to increase any of the command card types' effectiveness. Otherwise, pretty solid skill set. Her Noble Phantasm is an AoE Noble Phantasm that hits pretty freaking hard. It also increases her extra attack damage for 1 turn, which is pretty unique in itself. I mean, she was already unique with her second skill, but now she does that. And she's the best NP spammer in the game in terms of efficiency, in terms of reliability. In terms of damage, you could make the argument that Summer Musashi still hits harder. I think she hits harder. I mean, obviously, Summer Musashi is a Berserker as opposed to an Avenger. You also have to take into account that with every consecutive Noble Phantasm, kind of similar to Kama in this sense, she does more and more damage. Why? Because with her Noble Phantasm, she increases her NP damage for 3 turns. She's going to be doing more and more damage each consecutive turn you use her NP. And did I mention, just like Summer Musashi, she could NP spam with the Black Grill? I'm sorry if I'm all over the place. In terms of consistent NP spamming, Space's Char is literally the best. So if you don't want to go for Summer Musashi, fine. But if you want a solid NP spammer, Space's Char is your girl. She's accompanied with Calamity Jane, a 4-star archer. Carrying over to November, we do get a part 2 banner for Saber Wars 2 featuring MHX Alter, who is, of course, still a solid Berserker for the Scotty meta. And speaking of Scotty, Scotty might come back as well for one of the download campaigns, I believe. We don't get a Christmas rerun for some reason, but we do get the new Christmas event featuring 4-star Nightingale Archer, who is good utility-wise. She does have a targetable buff remover resistance, which again, buff remover resistance could come in handy. As for the gacha, we are introduced to a 5-star Saber, Astolfo, who is limited, by the way. And I don't know. I mean, I don't have Astolfo, nor do I care much about Astolfo, to be honest. So I'm sorry if my bias is showing. But as far as I know, he's pretty good for a quick Saber. So if you don't have Okida and you need a quick Saber, you're a fan of Astolfo, then I guess go for him. And we end off the year with December featuring Lostbelt 5. And you guys know Lostbelt 5 is where we are introduced to the Grand Archer. Spoiler alert. I mean, obviously this whole video has been nothing but spoilers for 2021. But Lostbelt 5 is going to feature the Grand Archer Orion, or Super Orion, as a lot of people love to call him. He's accompanied by Europa as well, who's a non-limited rider, and she's absolutely beautiful. She's not the best rider in the universe. She has her own NP battery, and she is a buster rider, so I mean, there is some merit to her skills there, but she's definitely not broken. I mean, I have her. I tried for her really hard, but otherwise, she's not, you know, the best servant in the universe. Super Orion, though, holy mother of God. One of the best solo servants in the entire game. He does have an Arts Noble Phantasm, which might seem kind of weird, but all he does with his Noble Phantasm is buff the crap out of himself, grants him Ignore Invincibility for 3 turns, Attack Up for 3 turns, Debuff Immunity for 3 turns, and he gains 10 crit stars for 3 turns as well. And if you look at his skills, he is meant to crit the crap out of all of his enemies. Literally meant for that. And his third skill is very interesting because it grants himself an on-attack activate buff where if he attacks with a buster card, it increases his crit damage that turn by 100% at level 10. Now he's mostly used for soloing, but if you team him up with Double Merlin, it's game over. Kind of funny how we ended off the year with a super busted buster servant. But yeah, like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, and comment down below. Let me know your top 5 favorite servants to go for 2021. And of course, subscribe to become a supporting character, to me the main character, because without you guys, I don't know what that was, I'd be the only character, and that would suck. And subscribe for Gilgamesh, because he's right here. He's been listening to me the entire time. I'm sorry that I called Arjuna Altar probably the best buster servant. You're still my king though. You're still my king. Arjuna Altar might be slightly better in terms of consistent damage, but you are the king of heroes. Just remember that. Nobody could take that title away from you, Gilgamesh, alright?
Zashu.
Alright, I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.